coming close together. You can loosely call these male and female, but technically, you know, kind of air quotes, male and female, all right? And I want you to notice that one of these filaments seems to be filling up with some material, and the other one seems to be emptying and transferring the material to the next one through this little bridge, correct? All right? All right, the bridge that connects the two. And it doesn't matter if I label it here or here. It doesn't matter. It's the same thing. This is what we call a conjugation tube. Conjugation tube. Now, the filament that is emptying, we call the minus filament. You can loosely call it male filament, but there really is no gender to this, okay? There's no sex to this. The filament that seems to be receiving the information is the positive or the plus filament. You can loosely call it female. Okay? So, the minus filament is transferring information, genetic information, to the plus filament. And the information is kind of fusing together, and it's going to produce this structure that you see filling the rest of that plus filament here on the right. This is a zygote.
So once it becomes like a circle, it's
Yeah,
a zygote.
that's complete oval there. That looks like he's got like a little protective layer around it is a zygote. All right, any questions?
So that's just the, I guess, the reproduction.
That would be sexual reproduction. It's
Okay.
still spirogyra. It's two spirogyra
It's just
filaments
connected.
that are
Okay.
connected in conjugation tube so we can transfer genetic information.
So for spirogyra, for like as far as slides go, like be able to recognize this, and then also
Yeah, the
just
parts.
the single.
The single one and the part. So if I
Okay.
showed you a single filament,
And you point
that's
it
where
to
you're
that.
really going to see the prominence of the nucleus, the chloroplast, cell wall.
Okay.
If I'm asking you reproductive things, they'll look more like this filament over here.
Okay.
Okay? And what's going to happen is this little guy right here, these guys are going to emerge out of this filament and form new spirogyra filaments. Okay?
So each one of those circles become one of those.
Becomes a new
strands.
filament of spirogyra.
Okay.
Yep.
I think I got it.
All right, so our algae here comes in different forms. This is a filamentous algae. This guy's found in kind of freshwater areas like lakes and streams. If you've gone hiking a little bit, lakes and streams, and you like the rocks are covered in that algae, that really thick kind of stringy algae. You've ever noticed it kind of flowing with the water? Most likely, not always, but it is possible that what you're looking at is spirogyra. Okay, there's probably some cyanobacteria, and there's probably all kinds of stuff in there. But one of the common ones that you would see would be spirogyra. All right? So, this guy's filamentous. We are going to look at a type that is colonial. So, in this filamentous algae, pretty much everybody kind of does their own thing. Each cell does their own thing. They produce food. They can reproduce. They're just kind of, living on their own. Okay. We move into the colonial types of algae, and we start to see a little bit of collective work going on. There's a division of labor. Certain cells do certain things. Now, this is Volvox. Now, although the Volvox appears pink, stained pink so that we can see it. It's actually a green algae. It's still Phylum Chlorophyta. Alright, he's kind of a little bit of an oddball. Okay? Because really what he is he's a collection of unicellular cells that live together. They have a protective sheath around them to hold them together. Some scientists argue that this guy actually should be classified as a multicellular. Okay, so it's still kind of up in the air. But these little tiny dots that you see look like this. So if I'm on the edge here, here's one of these little guys, and they look like that. They're little individual cells, little nuclei here. And these little dots, so this is each one of these little dots basically right there. And they look like this unicellular algae that's called Chlamydomonas.
They would have two flagella?
Two flagella. Okay. Now, Chlamydomonas we're not going to look at. He's a little unicellular algae. He actually is on page 275. But that's kind of what Volvox is. It's a bunch of these little tiny unicellular algal cells that are living together in a colony. Some cells photosynthesize. Some cells are going to be involved in moving the flagella beat, and this guy kind of spins around like a globe. Some cells are going to be involved in reproduction, sexual. Some cells are going to be involved in asexual reproduction. So there's just a lot going on in this little grouping of cells here. So this is still phylum. So you need to know the phylum. Chlorophyta. Need to know his name. He's Volvox. He is colonial. Spirogyrus filamentus. And two parts you have to know. Okay, this thing, first of all, is a whole Volvox colony. And there's two primary things that we can see here. We can see the individual little dots. Those are so simply called the individual cells. And then we've got these circles inside the circles. This is a new daughter colony that's been produced asexually. And that daughter colony will kind of evert out of the parental colony. And this guy, this little daughter colony, will go on to produce a whole other colony of Volvox.
And that's asexual?
That's asexual. We're not going to see sexual, but yes, there are going to be sexual cells produced to make a new Volvox via sexual reproduction, but we're not going to see that.
So with the little cells, would that be sexual? Like you can't see it?
No.
Okay.
No.
Are you gonna ask like sexual, asexual on the test?
That is an asexual daughter colony, so yes, you should know that. But you're not going to see sexual on this one at all.
No, that's sexual. Because that's making sense.
All right, any questions on Volvox? All right, we are going to look at two unicellular examples, but they're in a different group. They're not in phylum Chlorophyta. Volvox is also going to be a freshwater. We're going to look now at two marine examples. We talked about these guys in class. Most of these guys we've talked about when we talked about protists. Okay, so this guy looks like a little kaleidoscope. These are diatoms. So that's the slide you want. You want the slide that says diatoms.
It looks so random.
All right, these guys are unicellular. They're marine, and they're photosynthetic. Okay? They are photosynthetic. They're pretty big, important marine producers. These would make up what you would call phytoplankton, which is basically plant-like plankton organisms that are very small and moving through the ocean. They have shells, basically. They do secrete these shells, and their shells are made out of silica, which is glass-like. We talked about these in class. Diatoms, the remains, these shells, these are used as a polishing material. They're used as a soundproofing material, and they're used as a filtering. Like if you have a fish tank and you want to filter your fish tank, you would use what is called diatomaceous earth. That's diatoms basically. It's a powder. And it's basically all of these little tiny, minute little shells.
Is
That's
this
what's
when we
left.
just have to know it's a diatom?
Diatoms. That's it. And diatoms is simply a generic name.
What phylum is it?
Don't have to know the phylum. His phylum is called Bacillariophyta, but you can just call them diatoms.
That's perfectly fine.
And I'm okay with just diatoms. All right, any questions? All right, he's unicellular. We're going to look at another unicellular one. And his name is serratium. So your slide should look like this. This is just a whole bunch of those little organisms that are called serratium. All right, this group, or this organism, belongs to the group that we call the dinoflagellates. All right? How many flagella do they have? 2. You do need to know his name. All you need to know is to be able to recognize him. He is serratium. That's his genus name. You need to know that he is in the grouping of dinoflagellates.
So dinoflagellates is a group.
Dinoflagellates is a generic grouping.
Okay.
There's lots of different dinoflagellates. Serratium is one specific example. Okay.
And that's it for him?
Yep, that's it. Now, he is an important marine producer, so you do find him in the ocean. And he's out there in Galveston right now, along with his other dinoflagellate buddies. And they're hanging out. Very important producers, so they're going to be producing glucose. They're part of the food chain, just like the diatoms. They're phytoplankton. They're just there kind of hanging out, doing their thing, unicellular. However, when there is a runoff, and we talked about this in lecture, if y'all recall, when there's a runoff of rich organic matter, say from, ranching, cow manure, things of that nature, or fertilizers from farming, so nitrogen, phosphorus, those kinds of things. When those nutrients get elevated in the Gulf, it can cause these guys to explode in growth. We call it an algal bloom. Okay? Algal bloom means they just grow out of control. These guys are out there right now minding their own business. They're doing their thing. They produce very tiny levels of toxic substances. But when the levels are very low, it's all good. Doesn't bother anybody. You can go out there and swim in there. If you swallowed a mouthful of seawater, it would taste really nasty, but you'd be fine. Okay? However, in a bloom, obviously there's more of them. So more toxic substances are being produced. And if you get very high levels of toxic substances from these guys being produced out there, it can cause massive fish kills. Depends on where. This is what we call red tide. This is an organism that is responsible for red tide. Another cool thing about these guys is they do bioluminesce. So they kind of glow. So if there's a red tide, it'll look really pretty, but you kind of want to stay away. You don't want to swim. The toxic levels of substances can kind of make you ill. You don't want to eat the fish. If it happens, obviously, they'll tell you you can't fish in this area because of the red tide. If the red tide happens further out, away from the shore, it actually can impact deep sea fishing, commercial fishing, shrimping, things like that, because these toxins will accumulate in those shellfish and other fish, and it'll kill them, and if you eat them, it'll make you sick. I mean, you'd have, it's not common for people to die from eating, fish from a red tide, but, it'll make you wish you were dead probably. Okay? So, yeah. All right, any questions on this guy? So we've seen unicellular algae in the form of serratium here, the dinoflagellate, and the diatoms. We've seen filamentous, and we have seen colonial. The specimens back there that we have on display, those are multicellular algae. So those are going to be just, sargassum. We can throw in some kelp, but we don't have any kelp out for you to see, but the same idea. Okay, so there's a whole variety of algae out there. All right, any questions? All right, so now we're going to move on to land. So it's kind of like the animals. So we're going to move on land. So the algae, in particular, the green algae, phylum Chlorophyta, they are the ancestors of modern plants. And just like animals, plants had adaptations that allowed them to colonize land. Okay? So, the first land plants belong to phylum Bryophyta. And we're almost done with the animals in lecture, so we'll be into plants on Thursday very quick. So now we're in the true kingdom Plantae. The algae are actually protozoans. They're considered to be protozoans. So now we're in the true plants, kingdom Plantae. And the first phylum is phylum Bryophyta. Bryophyta are the mosses. Okay? They belong to a group of plants that we consider to be seedless and avascular. Well, they don't reproduce using seeds. Okay? They reproduce using something else. Avascular. What do you think avascular means?
No. Storage. No.
Okay. So it is. It's no vascular system. But what is the vascular system of a plant? You're talking about everything but the tissue, but you're on the right track. Y'all remember xylem and phloem. Do those terms ring a bell? Vaguely. Maybe vaguely. That's vascular tissue. That is what you're going to find in the roots, stems, and leaves. It's going to transport water. Phloem transports food. These plants don't have it. So, if they can't transport food and water long distances, what do you think their size is going to be?
Small.
Tiny. Okay? These guys are small. So, this right here, and I'm going to look for some at my house that has some other, this is all we had at the moment, so it's kind of gotten cold. I'll try to go see if I can find any outside. So pretty much what I have in my hand, right here, is one little moss plant. Okay? And this isn't like a baby. Okay? This is a full-grown moss plant. And y'all seen this stuff, I'm sure. Looks like a fuzzy green kind of carpet that you have growing outside on your landscaping rocks. It'll grow around your air conditioning vents, wherever it's nice and moist. So kind of pass it around as I talk about it here. So, he has to stay nice and small so he can transport water and nutrients because he doesn't have those specialized tissues to do it. They stay small, they live in very moist places. Okay? Because they're avascular. They don't reproduce using seeds, they reproduce using spores. Okay? And there's lots of different mosses. In that dish I'm passing around, there are male and female moss plants in there. But you can't tell them apart from each other unless we look at them under the microscope, which we will do. Back here in the back, this is another type of moss. And I have moss here. I'm going to try to, I don't have the dishes. I'll try to put this out at some point to display a little bit better. But this moss right here actually is the male moss plant. Here, this is the female moss plant. They look pretty similar. And then here, the only way that you can tell if you're looking at a male or a female plant, if it has this little stalk with this little cap growing out of it, like I've drawn up on the board. That's the only way you're going to be able to tell if you've got a male or a female plant. And what do you think that is? You think that's a male or a female plant?
Female.
It's the female.